The sun wasn't kind that day. It burned the land with a heat that felt personal, punishing, like a grudge held too long. Dust rose in waves across the prairie, dancing in bitter spirals. And out of that shimmer came a figure, thin, slow, and steady, like a ghost dragging the last of her will behind her. Her name was Maylene Hart, though no one had spoken it with kindness in a long time. She walked with her shoulders bowed under more than the heat. In her arms, wrapped in a sun-bleached scrap of a quilt, was a child, too still, too quiet for comfort. The little girl's hair clung to her fevered face, and every breath came shallow, as though she were apologizing for taking air at all. They hadn't eaten that day, likely not the one before either. What food Maylene had carried was long gone, traded off for scraps of medicine and one last bottle of milk. What she had now was nothing but dry skin, a parched throat, and hope gone brittle at the edges. Up ahead, just past the brush and the broken fence line, was a house. Weather-worn, its paint stripped down by years of wind and grief. The porch sagged slightly, but the rocking chair on it moved in a slow arc, carved by a boot pushing steady. Hollis Mercer sat in that chair, silent, still as a shadow, his hat low over his eyes. He'd seen her coming from a long way off, anyone would have. The land didn't allow for secrets out here. He hadn't moved until she stepped past the gate. "I don't mean to trouble you," she rasped, voice cracked from thirst. "Just need water. For her. Please." Her hands tightened around the bundle. The child moaned faintly, head lolling. The sound twisted something in Hollis that hadn't stirred in years. Not since Winter took his wife and boy in 1 week. Lungs filled up, bodies turned cold before the third snowfall. Without a word, he stood and went inside. The door creaked closed behind him, leaving her in that terrible, suspended stillness. She didn't sit, didn't shift the weight of her daughter. She waited, bones locked in place, because it was all she knew how to do anymore. He returned with a tin cup, beaded with condensation. In that moment, it looked like a chalice. She reached for it, but he didn't hand it over. Instead, he dipped a corner of the cloth into the water and gently touched the child's lips with it. The girl stirred, mouth-seeking, and he tipped a careful sip into her mouth. "She got a name?" he asked softly. "Abigail," Maylene whispered. 3. She's usually bright. Talks my ear off. Not today. No." He crouched beside them then, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. Hollis Mercer wore silence like other men wore pride. But his eyes, dark, heavy-lidded, carried the look of someone who'd been left behind by too many things. "Come on," he said. "Shades out back. I got broth on. I can't pay you." Didn't ask. He led them behind the house, where a canvas awning cast a blessed slice of shadow over the packed earth. A barrel of rainwater sat beneath it, and next to that, an old wash basin and a cracked wooden bench. "Sit," he said, disappearing again. She laid Abigail down, wiped her face with the corner of her own skirt. Her own lips throbbed for water, but she waited until the child slept. When Hollis came back, he had a tin bowl of soup and a chip spoon. She took it with both hands, but paused. "Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. Seemed wrong to let a child die in the sun. She nodded, tried to eat with dignity, but each bite felt like a betrayal of the hunger she'd gotten used to. Still, she finished it all, even drank the last of the broth from the edge of the bowl. When she looked up again, he was gone. Only the rocking chair moved, creaking faintly in the breeze. That night, he let them sleep on the porch, gave her an old quilt, and placed a lit lantern nearby. Not once did he ask who she was running from, or what had driven her into the dust with a half-dead child. And she didn't offer. Not yet. In the morning, Abigail's fever broke a little. Color returned to her cheeks in pale blotches. Maylene wept silently while pretending to adjust the child's quilt. A few townsfolk passed the ranch road that day. None stopped. But they'd seen. Hollis knew they'd talk. The widow Whitcomb was already likely sharpening her tongue, teacup rattling with indignation. Inside, he stirred coffee, poured 2 cups. Maylene hovered by the door, unsure whether she was welcome. "You want sugar?" he asked. "Can't remember the last time I tasted any." He placed the cup on the table and gestured. She sat. Slowly, hands trembling slightly, but not from fear. From the weight of being seen and not struck. I was raised in town, she said after a while. Taught piano. Read poetry. Was gonna marry a lawyer. But then I didn't. He sipped, waiting. Fell for a man who had nothing but blue eyes and bad ideas. He ran off when I told him I was carrying. Left me with a daughter and a church full of women saying I'd gone wild. Hollis only nodded. I walked from Missouri. Don't even know if I'm still in Texas or not. You are. Good. They didn't speak for a while. The coffee went cold between them, but neither moved. Then Abigail cried out. Not a pained cry, but a small, startled sound. Her body waking to something better than dying. Maylene stood, ran to her, held her close. From the porch, Hollis watched. He didn't smile. Just let the moment pass. Later that day, she cleaned his porch without being asked. Picked up old nails with a magnet and sorted them in jars. When he returned from chopping wood, he found the blankets folded, the kettle boiling, and Abigail sleeping safe in the shade. You can stay a few days, he said. She looked up, eyes wary. Don't you care what people say? They already say too much. That night, the stars came out sharp and cool. She sat on the porch steps, humming softly. A lullaby half remembered. He sat nearby, oil lamp casting a small halo around them. She misses her father, she said. Do you? No, she said quickly. Then slower, only the idea of one. He nodded. Understood that kind of absence. The wind picked up. A hawk cried in the far hills. And in the quiet that followed, something began to settle between them. Not love. Not yet. But recognition. A kind of tether forged not by passion, but shared emptiness. When she went to bed, if a folded quilt on the porch counted, she whispered thank you. He didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. Because, earlier, when he'd handed her a cup of water, he hadn't looked at her like a broken thing. He looked at her like a person worth saving. And for the first time in years, she slept without fear. The town of Windmere wasn't large, but its judgments were. They didn't fall like storms, they crept like drought, slow, dry, relentless. You could live there for 20 years and still be an outsider if you married wrong, prayed differently, or wore red on a Sunday. And if you walked in from the wild with a sick child and a sunburned face, people didn't ask what happened. They assumed. By the time Maylene stepped into town for medicine, the stories had already started. Some say she's that banker's daughter from Missouri, whispered Mrs. Wickham, leaning over the post office rail, her lace gloves clenched like claws. Others say she ran with outlaws. Hollis Mercer's taken her in, God help him. Poor man's lost his mind since his wife passed. Down by the general store, Reverend Calhoun paused sweeping his porch, eyes narrowing against the sun. He said nothing, but he watched as Maylene made her way toward the doctor's office, her child swaddled close to her chest. Her steps were uneven, one shoe split at the sole, the other missing entirely. She didn't look at anyone, didn't stop, just moved with the quiet dignity of someone who knew what it cost to be seen. Inside the small wooden building that passed for a clinic, old Doc Burnley barely glanced up. You again, he muttered, squinting over his spectacles. You still haven't got money. She laid a small embroidered handkerchief on the counter, once white, now yellowed with time. Her mother had stitched it when she turned 15, a relic from better days. For the child, she said, voice even. Doc grunted. Fever's broken? She's breathing steadier. But she don't eat much. He sighed, rummaging through a drawer. Handed her a vial of bitter root tonic. Won't fix the world, but it might buy her some sleep. And maybe your peace for a few nights. She nodded, tucked the bottle carefully into the folds of her skirt, and left. Outside, eyes followed her. A man leaned against a post, chewing tobacco. A young woman clutched her child closer as Maylene passed. No one spat on her. Not yet. But the silence thickened around her like tar. She didn't flinch. She'd lived with worse than stares. Back at the ranch, Hollis had laid out supper, simple cornbread, beans, boiled greens from the stubborn patch out back that survived drought and deer alike. He didn't ask where she'd been. Just passed her a plate. Abigail sleepin', Maylene said. Said she dreamed of birds. She talking more? She hums. That's new. He nodded. They ate in quiet, the creak of wood and the wind between slats the only conversation. But silence with Hollis didn't feel empty. It felt earned, trusted. After dinner, she stitched one of his torn shirts by lamplight. He watched her hands, deft and calm. You don't gotta mend my things, he said. She didn't look up. I like doing it. Helps me forget. Forget what? That I don't belong anywhere, she said quietly. That the only thing that's mine in this world is a little girl who might still forget how to laugh. He said nothing, just rose, stepped outside. When she followed, the sky had opened up into stars. The kind that stretched forever and made your troubles feel like dust motes. He lit his pipe, puffed once, then held it away from her so she wouldn't breathe it in. She noticed. Didn't say anything. Folks talking, he said finally. I know. You mind? I used to. Not anymore. Ain't much left of me to shame. He glanced over, the faintest crease between his brow. That ain't true. She swallowed. I was raised soft. Music, poetry, shulin. My daddy wanted me to marry a man with law books and land. But I fell for someone else. He waited. He was poor. Quick with a smile, quicker with lies. We ran. Thought it was love. It wasn't. She looked away, embarrassed. Left me in a cabin in the Ozarks with an empty sack and a growing belly. He said he was going to find work. Never came back. I carried Abigail for miles looking for help. Nobody wanted us. Not even my kin. The pipe's ember glowed softly. I walked south. Thought maybe Texas would forget me faster than Missouri ever could. He nodded. Texas forgets a lot, but it remembers pain better. She looked at him sharply. You too. My wife was named Lydia. She liked bees. Raised them. Said the hum made her feel close to God. Maylene didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Got sick one winter, he said. Our boy too. Fever came in like a thief. Took them both in a week. She said nothing. Didn't offer comfort. Just sat close enough that her skirt brushed his boot. And that was enough. In the following days, she found herself falling into the rhythm of his land. It wasn't much, a few acres, some cattle, chickens that hadn't laid properly in months. But it breathed with quiet life. A place of usefulness, not beauty. She scrubbed floors, hauled water, cleaned the hen house. He fixed the porch rail, sharpened her knife, built a cradle for Abigail out of old fence wood. She didn't ask. He just did it. Each night, they sat a little closer. Each morning, he left her half the coffee and didn't complain when she added chicory to stretch it. One morning, she stepped outside to find a folded dress on the railing. Her size. It wasn't new, but it was clean and whole. She touched the fabric gently, throat tightening. He came around the barn, wiping his hands. Found it in town. Mrs. Ellsworth's girl grew out of it. Maylene nodded. Thank you. She's got more if you need. I do. Still, she didn't put it on right away. Maybe because accepting kindness felt more dangerous than scorn. That afternoon, a rider came down the road, Mrs. Whitcomb's son, Everett. He tipped his hat to Hollis, barely glanced at Maylene. Ma says you're taking in strays now. Hollis wiped his brow with a cloth. You come here to say that, or did you have business? Everett hesitated. Just passing news. Folks are saying things. Folks always do. She's got a child, you know. Ain't yours. Hollis's jaw tightened. You done. Everett shrugged, turned his horse, and rode off in a cloud of red dirt. Maylene had heard it all. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. Hollis turned to her, mouth opening, but she shook her head. Let it be. I don't need defending. I've lived through worse. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. That night, the wind blew harder. A storm flirting at the horizon. Lightning flickered like a far-off warning. Abigail whimpered in her sleep, and Maylene soothed her with a lullaby so quiet it barely brushed the air. From the corner of the porch, Hollis listened. When she finished, he said, She's getting stronger. She's still afraid. You ain't. Maylene looked out over the dark hills. I was. But not now. You don't treat me like a broken thing. You're not. She turned to him, surprised by the firmness in his tone. He looked away. I've known broken things. You're not one. The quiet stretched again, but this time it held something new. Not silence born of distance, but of respect. Shared ground. As they sat, the lantern swayed gently in the wind. Abigail slept, brow smooth. And for the first time since her long walk south, Maylene felt the aching presence of something she'd forgotten how to name. Belonging. The next morning, Hollis saddled a mule cart, told her he was heading into town for seed, and asked if she wanted to come. She hesitated. Won't make you, he said, but you ought to be seen. I've been seen plenty. He met her gaze. Not like this. So she wore the gifted dress, brushed Abigail's hair, straightened her own spine, and when they rolled into Windmere, she sat tall beside him, chin high, as if she'd never been ashamed. Eyes turned, mouths whispered. Mrs. Whitcomb clutched her parasol like it was a rifle. But Maylene didn't look away. Neither did Hollis. Inside the general store, he bought flour, salt, and nails. She asked for soap and sewing needles, placed her coins carefully on the counter. Behind them, Reverend Calhoun watched. Said nothing. As they left, a small voice called out, Mama, she's pretty. A girl, maybe 5, holding her mother's hand. The mother shushed her quickly. Maylene smiled. Not at the child. Not at the mother. But at the space between them. Back on the ranch, as the sun dipped low, Hollis handed her a fresh bar of soap. She took it, fingers brushing his. Why'd you bring me to town? You needed to see you don't have to hide. She stared at him. I was beginning to forget who I was. You'll remember now. That night, she kissed his cheek. Not an invitation. Not a reward. Just a thank you for the silence, for the space, for the beginning. And inside the house, as Abigail murmured in her sleep, the wind whispered through the walls like a hymn. A quiet, growing thing had taken root. Still tender, still small, but real. And morning would come again. The storm rolled in before noon, a low, groaning belly of clouds darkening the sky like a scold. The kind of storm that made chickens go quiet and cows pace in circles. Wind slithered through fence posts and twisted dry weeds into dances they didn't want to do. On the edge of Hollis's land, Maylene stood barefoot in the yard, arms full of damp laundry, and looked up at the coming gray. Her dress clung to her knees. The wind teased strands of her hair loose, brushing them across her mouth like ghosts whispering secrets. She stayed there a moment longer than needed, letting the air press against her. Storms had always unnerved her. Not the lightning, not the rain, but the way they silenced the world right before they began, as if the earth were holding its breath. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Hollis's voice, low and calm. You see it. I feel it, she said. Best come in. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the distant line of hills where the clouds cracked open and spilled their fury in slanted streaks. As she turned, she saw Abigail in the window, cheek pressed to the glass, eyes wide, not scared, just watchful. Inside, the house felt smaller than usual. The light had gone gold, then gray, and the lanterns glowed like fireflies in jars. Rain started as a whisper, then became 1,000 small hammers on the tin roof. Maylene sat near the hearth, brushing out her daughter's hair, while Hollis mended the broken latch on the pantry door. No one spoke for a while. The silence wasn't tense, just thick with thought. Abigail shifted in her lap, looked up with fever-glossed eyes. Mama, where's the sun? Maylene smiled softly. It's still there, baby. Just hiding. Like when you're playing under a quilt. The little girl didn't smile back, but her eyelids drifted down, soothed by the steady cadence of rain and her mother's voice. Hollis glanced over from his work, taking in the sight of them. Maylene's fingers threading through damp curls. Abigail's small hand curled against her chest. You ever scared of storms? He asked. Maylene answered without looking up. Used to be. Not anymore. Why not? She shrugged. Storms are honest. They don't lie. People lie. He nodded, understanding threading his features like a shadow. Just after supper, the sheriff came. He didn't knock. Just opened the screen and stepped into the light like someone arriving at a funeral he didn't want to attend. His boots were slick with mud, hat dripping down his back. Sheriff Lyle Bennett was a square-shouldered man with a face like worn leather and a voice that rarely rose above the tone of authority. Hollis looked up from the kitchen table. Lyle. Hollis. Maylene stood quickly, instinctively, putting herself between the sheriff and her child. The sheriff sighed. Ain't here for trouble. Got a letter came down from Denton. Name on it said Maylene Hart. Sealed official. Maylene didn't move. What's it say? He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper, held it like it burned his fingers. Paxton read, claims you ran off with silver that belonged to him. Says you left him ruined and humiliated. He's pressing charges. Hollis rose slowly, one hand on the back of the chair. That man's got more silver than God. He's just mad she walked away. Sheriff Bennett looked at him, tired but not hostile. I ain't saying I believe him. Just saying it's been filed. If they push it through, you could see a summons. Maylene's face was pale, her lips a straight line. I didn't steal anything, she said. He gave me a ring. I gave it back. All I took was my child and what was mine. Then it'll come out that way, Bennett said, tucking the letter back into his coat. But just so you know, it's not just his name on the complaint. Mrs. Whitcomb vouched for his character. Wrote a testimony. Maylene flinched. Of course she did. Sheriff Bennett looked at her, then at Abigail, then at Hollis. I'm not talking her in. Not now. But if you get another letter, don't ignore it. He turned to leave, pausing in the doorway. You ever need someone to speak fair on your behalf, you let me know. Then he vanished into the storm, his boots thudding across the porch like punctuation marks. Maylene didn't move for a long while after he left. She just stood there, staring at the closed door as though afraid it would open again and take her with it. I should go, she said eventually. This house is yours. No use bringing trouble to it. You leaving won't stop the trouble, Hollis replied. Might only make it worse. She looked at him then, raw and hollow. I don't want Abigail seeing me dragged through town in irons. She won't, he said. You don't know that. I know men like Red, Hollis said. They're made of vinegar and vanity. He don't want justice. He wants you ashamed. She looked away, ashamed anyway. Abigail whimpered in her sleep, rolling toward the edge of the cot. Maylene moved to catch her, but Hollis was already there, catching the child with a gentleness that belied his rough hands. He settled her back, adjusted the blanket, tucked the doll she'd been holding into her arms. Maylene watched him, and something inside her shifted. Not fast, not loud, but permanent. Later, as the storm screamed louder and thunder shook the windows, they all ended up in the main room, too uneasy for sleep, too weary to talk. Hollis lit another lamp. Maylene warmed a bit of milk for Abigail. And the child, eyes still fogged from sleep, reached toward Hollis with both hands. He looked surprised, awkward. She want something? Maylene gave him the cup. You hold it for her. She likes when you do. He knelt, holding the tin gently. Abigail drank, blinking slowly. Then, as the wind howled and lightning made the walls dance, Abigail laughed. Just once, a tiny hiccup of sound, unplanned and bright. But it filled the room like church bells. Maylene covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes flooded. Hollis smiled faintly, the lines around his mouth softening. She laughed, Maylene whispered. God, it's been so long. She sounds like you, Hollis said. No, she whispered back. She sounds like hope. The rest of the night passed in softness. The storm rolled on, but it felt distant, secondary. Abigail fell asleep curled against Hollis's arm, her breath warm on his sleeve. Maylene sat close by, not touching, but near enough to feel the heat of his presence. When she finally stood, preparing their bed on the porch, Hollis followed. You don't have to sleep out there, he said. I know, she replied, but I need the air tonight. He nodded, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden horse, awkwardly carved, edges rough. I tried making a toy, he said. Wasn't sure if it'd hold together. She took it in both hands, thumb brushing over the splintered mane. She'll love it. He hesitated, then added, You can stay, Maylene. For good. If that's what you want. She looked up at him, rain streaking the glass behind him, and for a long moment didn't answer. But her eyes said everything. In the morning, the storm was gone. The earth smelled of life and wet cedar. Birds returned to the branches like cautious believers. And the little wooden horse sat beside Abigail's pillow, her fingers still curled around one leg. Morning began with gold spilling over the hills, soft and forgiving, as if the land itself had decided to hold its tongue. Dew clung to the grass like forgotten prayers. Hollis stood in the doorway of his barn, watching the horizon. Something in his posture had changed, his shoulders not quite as tight, the scar across his jaw less angry in the light. Behind him, the house stirred gently. A pot simmered. Abigail's voice echoed in soft giggles, and Maylene hummed something half-remembered from a time before shame had claimed her voice. She carried water in a clay jug toward the wash basin, sunlight dancing in the ripple of its weight. Her gait had steadied in the past week. Her eyes, once wary, held the strange sheen of someone learning how to believe again. She poured the water, wiped her palms on her skirt, and looked toward the road. A dust trail curled far in the distance. Hollis saw it too. His breath shortened, chest tightening with something old and familiar, trouble coming like a clock striking noon. He didn't call out, just set his tools down and walked toward the house, the same way he'd walked toward a storm. Slow, prepared, bone-weary of fighting, but willing all the same. By the time the riders reached the gate, Maylene had already wrapped Abigail in a shawl and tucked her behind the woodpile. "Don't make a sound, baby," she whispered, her hand trembling against the girl's cheek. "Just stay small." Abigail didn't ask questions. She just nodded, serious as a judge. 3 horses kicked up dry earth in front of the porch. At their head sat Paxton Red, still dressed like a man who believed his money meant righteousness, all polished boots and a silver belt buckle heavy with ego. He dismounted with theatrical slowness, glancing at the chipped siding and worn fence as if the place itself offended him. Behind him stood 2 hired men, silent, thick-shouldered, faces dull with cruelty. One wore a rifle slung across his back, the other had brass knuckles tucked into his belt. Hollis stepped forward. "You've got no call to ride up armed on my land." Paxton smiled like a man already savoring the taste of victory. "I've come for what's mine." "She's not yours. Never was. Not her. The child. Abigail's my blood, and I'm talking her." Maylene stepped out from the side of the house, her back straight, chin high. "You don't get to speak her name." Paxton's expression curdled. "You stole from me, Maylene. My reputation, my money, my future. You think a man forgets that? You should have taken the marriage. You were mine." "No," she said, voice steady. "I was never yours. I gave back your ring. You just couldn't stand the world knowing a woman left you. So you spread lies and waited for me to crawl back. But I didn't, and I won't." Hollis moved closer, his presence quiet but solid beside her. "You best turn around, Red." Paxton laughed. "And if I don't? You gonna draw on me, Mercer? Kill a man in front of a child?" "I don't need to draw. You already lost." Red stepped forward. "Then I'll take her myself." He moved fast, faster than Maylene expected. One moment his boots scraped gravel. The next, his hand was reaching past her, grabbing at Abigail, who had stepped out from her hiding place with a cry of fear. Hollis caught his wrist mid-motion, twisted hard. The snap echoed like a tree branch breaking. Paxton howled, dropped to one knee. His men stepped forward, but Hollis didn't flinch. His eyes cut toward them, and something in his expression gave them pause. He didn't need a weapon. He was won. Maylene moved then, gathering Abigail up in her arms and backing away, holding the child so tightly that Abigail whimpered, breath catching in her chest. "You all right, sweetheart?" she whispered. Abigail nodded shakily. "Mama, I'm scared." "I know, baby. But you're safe now." Paxton cursed, holding his twisted wrist. "You'll regret this. Both of you." Hollis crouched beside him, voice low. "You've got power in town. Money. Friends who still believe your version of things. But here on this land, you've got nothing. You lay a finger on that girl again, I'll bury you with your silver." The hired men pulled Red to his feet, one of them glancing nervously toward Maylene and the child. As they mounted, Red spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." Maylene stepped forward, Abigail still in her arms. "It is for us. You don't speak for me. You never will again." The horses galloped off in a mess of fury and frustration, leaving behind only a churned-up yard and the smell of fear hanging in the heat. Hollis turned toward her slowly, his breathing unsteady. "You all right?" She nodded, trembling. "I was ready to run. Again. But I didn't. I stayed." He stepped forward, hesitated, then touched her arm. "Not possessive. Just there. Present. Real. You stood your ground. That's what matters." She exhaled then, the breath hitching in her chest. "I was so scared he'd take her." "He won't," Hollis said. "Not while I breathe." They stood in silence as the wind picked up, brushing dry grass into little songs at their feet. That night the preacher came. Reverend Calhoun walked up the path with a cane and a lantern, his old boots knocking gently against the earth. He'd heard what happened. Of course he had. Windmere's gossip moved faster than wildfire and cut just as deep. They poured him coffee. Maylene sat beside Abigail, who clutched the little wooden horse Hollis had made. The Reverend took one long look around the room, then set down his hat. "I was wrong," he said. "No preamble. No polite softening. I listened to folks who judged by whispers. But I see now. That child's got light in her eyes again, and a mother who fought for her. That counts." Maylene blinked, stunned. Reverend Calhoun looked toward Hollis. "And you opened your door, not knowing what came with it. That's what grace looks like. Not charity, not pity. Grace." Maylene whispered, "I didn't think anyone would say that out loud." "Well," the Reverend said, smiling gently, "sometimes the Lord's mercy wears boots and smells like wood smoke." He rose slowly, nodded once, and left as quietly as he'd come. The days that followed were slow, warm, and full of small things. Abigail stringing wildflowers into a garland, Maylene humming while she kneaded bread, Hollis carving another toy, this time a little wagon with uneven wheels. The well behind the house had gone dry earlier that spring, but Hollis began digging a new one, this time closer to the porch. Each day, Maylene carried water in a bucket from the creek, pouring it gently over the garden, Abigail's hands splashing in the cool. One afternoon, she knelt beside Hollis at the growing pit, sweat on her brow. "Why here?" she asked. "Closer to the house. Easier for her," he nodded toward Abigail, "to fetch it when she's older. And for me." His gaze flicked to hers. "And for you." They stared at each other, not touching, but bound by something heavier than skin. When the well was finally dug, and water rose clean and cold from the dark earth, Hollis built a marker beside it, just a small wooden post, carved by hand. On it, Maylene burned the words with the tip of a hot nail. "For the thirsty, for the lost, water and home." That evening, Abigail danced barefoot in the yard, hair catching the sun, laughter spilling from her like music. Maylene sat on the porch steps, heart full in her chest. Hollis came to stand beside her, a glass of sweet tea in his hand. "You gave me more than shelter," she said softly. "You gave her a father." He didn't speak, just handed her the tea and sat down beside her, thigh brushing hers. They watched the sun go down without needing to say another word. And when the stars rose like blessings overhead, Maylene whispered, more to herself than anyone, "I came here, begging for water, and found a place we could live." The wind carried her words up into the night, and from somewhere deep inside the house, Abigail's voice floated out, laughing, free, whole. Sometimes, salvation doesn't arrive with trumpets or miracles. Sometimes, it comes with a cracked cup of water and a man who listens.